Hey everyone, thank you for joining today. We have the pleasure to have Pini Reznik with us, and I think it's going to be an interesting talk today about the experience with container solutions and the lesson that he learned there. And we're also going to discuss about the cloud native landscape. And let's see where the conversation is gonna lead. So Pini, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure for us. We know each other for a long time, and it's actually good to meet again here in this podcast.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, we also have Wojciech Kachan and Piotr Szwed with us. We're all three of us are members of the FICA Works. But we're not going to go too much into detail about that because I don't want to take the spotlight off Pini. So, Pini, would you like to maybe start and tell us a little bit about yourself and what have you been doing in the last, let's say, 12 years?
Uh, yes. Thank you. My name is Pini Reznik. I'm actually currently I'm on sort of sabbatical, taking time off after the last 12 years of building clouds and stuff. Uh, but basically, so I'm originally coming from Israel, and I moved to Holland about 12 years ago. And my technical background is mostly software configuration management, so internal tooling within development teams. So in a way, we will talk about this later, but I started doing it over 20 years ago, and that's exactly where all the principles of cloud native were used and defined, right? So continuous integration and delivery, internal development process, and things like that. They were confined to engineering teams and not used for entire company. But the background of continuous integration, delivery, and everything else, so I started doing it over 20 years ago. So then I spent uh, beginning of my career in Israel in companies. The biggest one you may know is Checkpoint, which was quite amazing place to learn how to actually work properly. Um, a lot of people from Checkpoint became founders or senior people in other places and potentially build the entire security ecosystem of cybersecurity. I moved to Holland to join TomTom as uh, configuration management team lead, sort of.
What was
Uh,
the motivation to move there?
uh,
Do you remember?
that was totally random. And it was just like middle of nowhere. Somebody reached out. Do you want to go to Holland? There's this nice company. And 3 months later, me and my family with two small kids, we were in Holland and in an entirely new environment. It was a very interesting move. I guess it was nice. Um, but it wasn't planned or anything. It was just almost accidental.
Okay.
And then I joined a small consultancy with my later co-founder of Container Solutions, and except the last few months, the last 8.5 years, I was building Container Solutions in different roles. First as CTO, then as CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, responsible for marketing and sales, and then again CTO, and recently I left it behind and took a bit of time off and now starting something else.
Okay. So just second. Yeah, excellent. So can you tell us what was the motivation to move into starting this consultancy
Right.
and moving away from TomTom?
So I think when I moved when I left TomTom was in somewhat difficult situation, and they were restructuring, and it was just sort of this standard challenge of being part of a large organization when things change and you disagree with things and no one cares, right? So then you sort of move around for a while, you try your best, and eventually you don't achieve anything. So there was very strong motivation, just leave it behind and do something on your own. And that's why I joined Jamie on his in his company Ugly Duckling, which was somewhat challenging for whatever reasons. But it was interesting year and a half where I started first time in my life I did consulting, but that led us to Container Solutions, and Container Solutions was really from day one, the idea was to build proper company, proper business on scale, and go big, and then address global challenges. And then we didn't call it cloud native, but cloud native world. What
But
later
what,
became cloud
what
native.
so what was the trigger actually that you moved from Ugly Duck into Container Solutions, like start a new company pretty much as a joint venture with Jamie?
I think so. There are some challenges within Ugly Duckling which are not relevant for the journey. So, but they basically caused us to move forward, and also we got support from another company, Trifork, that supported the journey from the beginning, and they invested a bit in Container Solutions, and they helped us to bootstrap in different ways. So it was good clean start, and we at that point we had ideas on building products and we didn't know exactly what we were doing. And I think the best support they gave us was you just do consulting, do services company, you know what how to do it, just go for it. And was good
That's what you
decision.
did. That's what
Yes.
you did.
We
Okay.
did not
So
know anything how to run company or build company at that point. So that was interesting journey.
so
So
how did it start? Like, were you and Jamie the only the only consultants there, or you started hiring people? Would like to learn more about how things got bootstrapped.
so we actually also as part of relationship with Trifork, they had two engineers who were already interested in containers. It was all about Docker at that point and containers. The only thing that mattered in 2014 was Docker. And they basically those two engineers who were we were talking to them, we were part of the same community, we were going to the same, we were organizing Docker meetups for a year at that point, and we were very closely sort of not working with them, but communicating, I don't know, to participate in the same community. For example, there was this point where I was using some Git repository in my presentation to show how to do something, and I don't remember the technical details, but something with Docker. And I was showing it in Docker meetup in Amsterdam, and this guy is like, "Oh, that's my repo," in the meetup, right? Was Quentin, and it was so like shocking, right? You imagine I just pull random repo from Git about Docker, and the guy is in with like 20 people in the middle of some random place in Amsterdam. So the ecosystem was really tiny at that point. So getting these two engineers from Trifork plus a marketing person was quite big help, because finding people was in the early days of a company possible. People don't want to join a startup at that stage.
Okay. And how long did it take before you start, growing the company, like hiring more people
Immediately.
immediately?
The we had this fear. You always have this fear. What will happen if you don't get any sales? What will happen if you? But then we just did have sales, right? We had a customer. We effectively had a customer before the company was officially incorporated. actually the struggle in the first year was not how we find sales or customers, but how we find people to satisfy the demand. To the point that we had a customer that, we closed the deal on 12 people, that we had to have 12 people to deliver work to that customer, and we only had about 6 at that point, and most of them were on another customer. So it was a challenge to figure out how to actually. So you have basically, when you don't have any sales, it's a big problem. Then you're losing money. But if you have too much sales, then you're overwhelmed with work, and then you're running around like headless chicken, and you find people, and people are not. It's great if you find good people, but also in early days there were no people with expertise. So it was so random and like all over.
Yeah, I mean, this brings me to my next question. So you kind of like overcommitted resources to customers without really like having them, or maybe not having a good perspective on how to get the people over there. So I reckon that would also add a bit of pressure on you to help delivering those things, right? And how did you like split the work between managing and growing the company, and also supporting the consultancy team and delivering the technical services to your customers?
I I want to say we had perfect system. Everything was arranged in nice boxes, and it just doesn't work this way. It even when we were much bigger, it never did work properly. And like there's always something. But in early days, obviously, it was just rushing from one thing to another. Right? I think from day one we very clearly decided we want to build, like Jamie would say, we want to work on the company, not in the company. So for very early days, we decided we want to build internal processes. We don't want to be all the day at customers, so we don't want to be like glorified freelancers. We want to run a business and grow it and find investors and find bigger customers and build internal sales and marketing teams and everything else. In early days, we opened German office and later on Canadian office, and then we had some other attempts to do other things, and yeah, and then we went to Poland, and Piotr can tell the story, and it was interesting adventure. Um, it's always sort of ups and downs, right? Uh, but from the beginning, we decided we will not always go after the profitability, but we will grow the company and build internal process so we can be bigger. Because if we are bigger, we can get bigger projects, so we can have more influence on the market, more influence on the ecosystem, and growth opportunities for ourselves and for people working in container solutions.
Okay.
I
This
want
is a
to.
strategy.
Oh, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead, Valtin.
No, I was just wondering if this is a strategy that you would like to replicate or reuse in the future.
I
Do
think the
you think it's
difference
a good?
now is that the big difference now that we actually have done it once already, or I have, and some others with me, and some too. If I would be doing something like that again, it would come with the benefits of the hindsight, right? So it's I know how to do marketing, I know how to do sales, and even if I'm not a professional salesperson, I know how to choose the right vendor. I know how to basically I know what to expect. Like early days, we somewhat accidentally or intuitively stumbled into content marketing principle, right? And we were very noisy and present and knew everyone, connected to everyone. But we didn't do it in systematic and professional way, right? We were just trying our best. Today, I would do it in a very systematic way, right? I would intentionally focus on how to get leads from the marketing and how to build marketing system that creates brand reputation, how to build the brand, all those things. I mean, if you ask a random person what marketing is, they wouldn't know. And that's how we were in early days.
So, I wanted to ask about the early days, and you mentioned your first customers and going into services. I think a lot of people, when they found the companies, they think product versus services. So was the choice on services based on the fact that you found a customer before it was incorporated, or was it that you started looking for customers by choice and that's how you focused on services?
So from day one, it was a services company. There is no question about that. That was the agreement with Trifork, the investor, between us. It was a consulting company, period, right? And we also, from our experience looking at other consultancies, we had very strong opinion about not building any products, right? Because I still very strongly believe that when consultancy building pet projects and spending a lot of time, and time is money, right? Time is unbilled hours, right? Is effectively, if you're doing it on the side, fine, but then you cannot invest enough to build a proper product. And if you take people away from consulting and putting them on a product that you fell in love with, you're effectively funding them from your profitability. And that's fine. You're very convinced that this product will go somewhere, but I wouldn't do that without external funding, because you need some level of validation that this product is needed in the first place. It's so easy to just kill the consulting business by building a product. It's a very different story when you have a customer that paying you to build a product, and then later on you can repackage it and try to sell to others and then leverage and then pivot into product business. But although we had some opportunities to do that, we never really had proper opportunity to pivot into products. We actually like consulting, right? So I strongly believe that a consulting business should focus on consultancy, and if there is an opportunity to build a product, then it should be spun off. And
yeah, and were there any instances of things that people did spin off or were wanting to spin off?
Something obvious.
So I know at one point cloud costing was quite a big topic, and there were some people who were talking about that and may have gone into that. I don't know how successfully.
There is, I don't know, one example that comes to mind, which is not exactly the same thing, is, for example, Zibia is a large consultancy in Holland. They tend to spin off companies, for example, but mostly not products, but consultancies, Binks and some others. Actually, there is a great example. Trifork itself, they build this product, Humio. Right, Humio is actually quite famous and big, and it got funded and sold out. So actually, it's an internal system delivered as part of consultancy to their customers. And later on, the CTO said, okay, now I want to do something new. I will take Humio, I will sort of split it off Trifork, and then build it as a separate company. And it was super successful. But they knew how to manage the product while it wasn't called Humio when it was inside Trifork, but they managed very well the product while it was inside the company and leveraged to provide better services to their existing customers. And once they decided to go for a product, they totally spin it off. They put a new leadership and entirely full, like a Chinese wall between companies, and no integration, right? And everyone won from that, right? Everyone wins. Some of the employees from Trifork moved to Humio, and yeah, overall was very successful project.
Are you mentioning this because it's like a way to succeed with this, or?
Those are opinions, right? So I think one of the things that sometimes people say, like, I know for sure this is the way. I have no idea. I'm just seeing things that work and that doesn't. I think I saw other consultancies, I won't mention the names, that they would put, 50 people consultancy that permanently put 4 people in developing internal product that sells 100K a year. That's just stupid, right? It's just plainly bad business, right? Because it doesn't, I mean, obviously 4 consultants can bring so much more money, right? So effectively the opportunity cost between how much they could have brought and the actual revenue from the little the product is bringing, this opportunity cost is effectively VC funding from your profitability. Now you can afford it, fine, but they couldn't afford it, which led to change of leadership, and effectively founders were fired, and it's not a good idea because people they fall in love with their ideas. And that's why funding and going to market and finding real customers is actually a good test for viability of a product.
Yeah, you're right. But there's also something, I mean, delivering consultancy, the growth curve is like, it doesn't move that much, right? I mean, you start from a certain, let's say, rate, and you can, I mean, you know how many hours you can bill a year for a consultant, and then the rates, they do not vary that much, but they actually fluctuate. And but with the product, you start with 100K a year, and you might have that for 5 years, and then something happens, and then you move from 100K to 1 million.
Sure. But to move from 100K to 1 million revenue, you need to put 20 people team on it, and you will never be able to do that as a consultancy. You need external funding. The biggest difference between consultancy and a product business is that it be funded. It cannot be profitable from the beginning. It takes on average 3 years to build a meaningful product with a team of typically dozens of people. Consultancies cannot afford making this kind of investment, and consultancies, they must make money all the time. There is no funding, right? There is no, there is, it's a profitable, it must be profitable business. Otherwise, it doesn't have any right to exist. So this is the big difference. You have VC funding for at least 3 years to build up the product and the momentum and the reputation and the name and the marketing and all those things, right? And only then you start seeing revenue, and then you say, okay, I see revenue 100K a year is tiny, but it's trusting me and giving me my money, so it's a good opportunity to another round of funding and get another 10 million on the 100K or a million, let's say, a year revenue, right? You get another 10 million funding to continue building the product. You see how impractical it is within these constraints of a consulting business.
I think that part of the I'm part of the interest that Valentinas and I have is about this is there is still some overlap, right? So, for example, having a consultancy company gives you access to certain customers that may be interested in the product, gives you some insight of what the product should be. So I agree that then you have to put some of the engineers on the product instead of on the consultancy. But I think the question is, wouldn't there be some overlap that would justify enough of, for example, doing a POC and then spinning that POC off into a separate company, like you suggested earlier?
I think this is exactly right. Yeah. So I think what product companies often lack, and we were working with a lot of product companies as consultancy or as just part of ecosystem. We talk to them. What they lack is real life experience, right, and access to real customers. A lot of it is based on their guesses, understanding of the market, or maybe previous experience before they started their company. While a consultancy has broad experience of actual companies, actual businesses, actual problems. So in this sense, that's super valuable, right? And also consultancies often can very quickly run POCs or experiments because that's exactly the consulting business. It's to do something small, and then again, assuming it's a reasonably agile business. So that's why consultancies are perfect to experiment and find a new product idea that fits actual market. But they're not as good in scaling to be proper marketing product business. right? So of course there's, for example, in container solutions, multiple times we actually helped smaller business, or actually both smaller and large enterprises to develop product ideas. There are a few, I'm not sure I can mention by name. I think Adidas I can mention by name. There was really, really exciting, interesting product related to collaboration with PlayStation that was super advanced, and we were helping them to iterate through development of their product because they're really they really needed our capabilities of like market understanding and ability to iterate fast and expertise. But you're right. Yes, so there is a lot of value in consulting business to help product companies to build better products. But again, when it becomes a viable product and you need to scale it, it has to be separate.
Cool.
Yeah, so moving into sort of alternative revenue streams to consulting is generally very much like you have someone on there. If they're not working, they are a cost to the company. And I know that what other sort of options are there for consulting companies to sort of have a more stable income rather than relying entirely on landing contracts and keeping the sales pipeline full?
I mean, I wish I could answer this question well. Because obviously every consultancy, this is like a holy grail of consultancy, is recurring revenue, right? It's like we will just do something and the money will pour in, right? It just doesn't work this way very well, right? So of course you can, there are different things you can do. You can do some sort of retainer contracts, like you sell certain things that are recurring over a longer period of time, like support or advice or something. But that tends to diminish over time, because if it's advice over time, then your customer becomes smarter and more educated over time, and the value of your advice is diminishing, right? So and in a very positive way normally, right? So you feel like your customer is self-sufficient; they can continue on their own. So it's amazing to see them grow up and not need your help. But obviously, it's negative impact on your business. You can do 24/7 support. We tried that, not very successfully, because the business is dramatically different. You cannot mix consultants at entirely different structure and different management and different everything. What else? Of course, you can do reselling, which is, I think that's actually good business. We never did that because we always wanted to be vendor neutral. That was a business choice, right? To be vendor neutral, to be able to provide strategic advice to our customers. And but if you are committed for Google, for example, there's this company, Do It. So they're committed to Google. I think now they're not committed anymore, but then they have a clear agreement with Google Cloud, and then they resell, and reselling is actually very good recurring revenue, except that it doesn't really going to you, it's going to the cloud. You're only getting a tiny piece of it. So, I mean, there are many ways. Trainings are also somewhat, maybe less. Training are great in the way that there is massive margin, but there is massive investment up front. So if you have a successful training, it's amazing. But what often happens is that you spend months and months building a training course and then no one buys it because you don't know how to sell it. Because selling trainings is done in different way to different people. You always focus on your main business, and then you see, we tried all of it, I think. And if we miss something, eventually you can do multiple lines of business, but you need to see which one is most important. And in difficult times, that's the only one that remains.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you start to split across different things, you actually go shallower in each one that you're focusing on. And
trainings, for example, trainings and 24/7 are explicitly There's different sales cycle, there are different target personas, there's almost different market, right? It's like and building entirely different business. So your salespeople become confused. Are they selling trainings to HR teams typically, or they're selling consultancy to engineering teams, or operational support to operations teams, right? You see, it's entirely different target audience.
Yeah, I suppose it only makes sense once a company hits a certain size that to start
I
spinning.
believe so. Yeah, I believe at certain size you can, but that's very similar to like building product, right? So you need to have a leader who leads that new part of the business, and you need to invest seriously in that. You need to have potentially separate salespeople, separate marketing. So there is, but that's what we always wanted to be, like a proper company that does those things intentionally and with proper investment. In hindsight, of course, we tried, but didn't always succeed.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the what was your strategy to improve the technical skills of the people, to get them, more up to date with the tools and technologies, and to deliver better services to your customers?
Right. That's actually a very important point, and I think for us it was particularly important. I think and some of you worked in or with container solutions, so you probably know that we invested a lot of time in learning, and not particularly class learning, like sending people to trainings and stuff, but constantly every minute of time that is not at customer, or actually at customer, to pick up new technologies. We didn't really want to exploit the existing knowledge from the engineers that we hired, right? But we wanted everyone to grow and develop in something bigger. And I believe a lot of engineers and non-engineers that join Container Solutions over time build up their careers and knowledge and experience in a lot of different ways. Not that I don't believe in class learning. I just think it's not enough. I think the best way to learn is to go to different customers and try to do things you haven't done before. And we specifically in Container Solutions, we invested in putting people in places where they're challenged. And it's often difficult. It's almost always difficult. But I think that's the best opportunity to grow. And that's in addition to, pushing people to read books and go to conferences and share ideas and run meetups and speak. And, once you write, then you learn the topic more than anything. So for us, it was really massive part of why we wanted to do the business, is because we wanted to grow and learn, and we wanted everyone working with us to do the same.
Nice. And obviously, if you're pushing people in challenging situations, not everyone's going to succeed all the time. How do you deal with that?
That's not everyone will succeed, and not everyone will like it, and not everyone will remain in a company, right? But I think providing as much support to people in difficult situations, and so really helping them to grow, but also, listen to those are obvious things, right? Just be there, like as a manager, as a project manager, as a founder of the company, you need to be there and help people to get over the difficulties and help them to grow and get better. And if they can't, then move them to another project and bring somebody else. And it's not always possible because, we committed to the customer and, all the difficulties related to moving people around. I can't say that we always were very good in this, right? Probably the opposite. I think we probably pushed people too hard often, which is great. They learned a lot, but then also there were a lot of problems with with people finding themselves in very difficult situations with customers. I still believe that overall we probably were a good company to work at least to get experience.
I think so too. We have a question on the chat, and I think it goes along with what we were discussing earlier about the. So the question is, how do you see the evolution of tools and platforms in the next few years? And maybe you can relate that to also how you push people to learn new things, and maybe describe a little bit the velocity and the changes that happen in this environment that we're all in.
Okay, I think I will need to start this one very well, a while back. So first, when we started, again, we started from Docker, right? There was nothing else, there was Docker. It was trigger for the entire ecosystem, right? So when in 2013, I think 2013, I saw the presentation from Solomon Hicks, with first version of Docker, first public version of Docker. It was like, exactly, this is exactly what I needed in my previous company, right? So exactly, there are two use cases. One is packaging in build system, right? So when you have continuous integration on large number of components, the packaging was the worst piece, right? So the ability to package things quickly, it was like with all the dependencies, without relying on everything and like every piece of library on your machine. This was like amazing. This is exactly what every build system needed. And the second one was for web systems, right? So web systems started moving into not really microservices or monolithic, whatever, but more like you had to multiply it in many times. Even monolithic systems had a lot of instances running, right? And being able to reliably deliver them to different places and start them there is like, okay, again, Docker, right? So in this sense, Docker was for me is like revelation. It's because even before that, with we were talking with my then colleague in TomTom, Lukasz Guminski, who you know, most of you at least. So we were talking about something like Docker, maybe in 2013 or 12. So that's why when Docker appeared, it was like, okay, this is exactly what we need. Right. So when it started, there were maybe a dozen companies around that, like Calico or Weave and the storage company. There was like a dozen of them. I still like, if I go back, I can remember the names of people who were like 50 people was entire ecosystem. Then it went through all kind of stages, like once containers sort of, everyone understood that containers are not really important, everything moved into schedulers. Then it was like, hopefully you remember the schedulers wars with probably about a dozen schedulers with main ones, Mesos, Swarm, and Kubernetes. Kubernetes wasn't born when we started, right? Neither cloud native foundation existed. So basically, in those first days, the first trigger was containers. This was sort of a trigger for a new thing. It was the catalyst of starting a new ecosystem. It's like physical containers, its ability to package something and deliver it in a different way. Then there was sort of next circle around that was basic infrastructure, networking, storage, then monitoring, some other things. So really things that are technically missing within Docker itself, containers. And then scheduler, so scheduler ability to do it on scale. And from that point, it basically didn't change much, except it's just becoming better and faster and higher quality. And so now we are talking about those, I don't know, probably 1,500 to 2,000 tools and cloud native foundation landscape. At the end, it's basically, you have cloud native platform, right? And then a bunch of tools around it, right? So in the first 2 or 3 years, all the seeds of this ecosystem were already in place, right? And now we are basically continuing to continue developing those tools and making them mature and scalable. And more than anything, the last 5 years were about migration of actual companies to the cloud native world and to the cloud. Right, so if this is sort of the background, then I believe that so the first, from 2014 when we started, I was talking to people about Docker, and people were like, that no one will care. It doesn't work on Windows. It's like, you cannot, blah, 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 right? So the first 2 or 3 years, it was just talking to people and saying why it's a good idea. Most people didn't understand. Then it was about working with innovators and trying to help them to build something useful. And the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, were about working with real companies, real large enterprises, small-sized businesses with real loads, with real customers, and helping them to actually use this entire cloud-native ecosystem on scale, in high quality, without high availability, everything. And I think the next stage is about optimization. Right, so I think today we, not that everyone knows how cloud native works, but there is enough knowledge and experience to be able to build significant cloud native systems, right? And I think Container Solutions was a significant player in that field, so helping companies to actually do that right. I think the next step is to go back to those similar companies and help them to do it right, to save cost, to be greener, to build teams in a better way, right? To be more socially responsible. So all those things. So it's basically a sort of combination of being more socially responsible and efficient.
Yeah, this seems to be like a narrative in the last couple of years, at least, people focusing on this. So one just quick question about this. So you described Docker like being some sort of a revolution that kind of opened the door and created an ecosystem, and probably all the tools, most of the tools that came afterwards were actually designed and meant to support running containers in a way. Like I'm gonna make it like really like simple. I'm not gonna get into details. So the question is, do you expect another revolution in like this in the future?
So let me sort of turn it around. That's not exactly what I think. So there is this book I read it a while ago called The Books. I really recommend, if you want to know anything, like, it's about physical containers. It's about world of physical containers. It's about how the industry was started, when the first containers appeared. But roughly in 50s, there was this guy who was pushing for containers, and he successfully built a company that did containers around US. And then it's a long story. He succeeded and then went bankrupt and succeeded again, and it doesn't matter. The point of the story is that when I was reading that book maybe 4 years ago, it was like, okay, this is exactly the process, the change process that is happening with containers in software. And it goes to the somewhere middle of the book, and then it becomes sort of science fiction, and then it's like, okay, now I can see where containers can lead us. So in that book, the story was like this. First was a single container. So before container, where there is wooden ships. I used to do conference talks with this topic, but and I had very nice slides with like ships and stuff. So there was this wooden ships with a bunch of people manually carrying stuff into the belly of the ship, right? And then trying to sort of put them in the right shape, and like a sort of like a puzzle. And then it sails away, comes back, and comes to the other side, and then manually people moving out things, right? So then when containers came in, the first idea of the containers were basically to save loading and unloading in the dock, right? So it is really about, like in software containers, it's about starting and shutting down, right? Or basically, or moving around. But then what happened was that, so before containers appeared, all the factories and all the production of most of the goods were very close to the port. Like Manhattan was full of factories. San Francisco near the port was full of factories. So what started to happen was that the containers allowed companies, once the basic infrastructure was built, like the ports, the cranes, the ships, the containers, once the scale was there, right? What started to happen that the factories started moving away from the ports, because putting container on a train or a truck and carrying it over 500 kilometers was not a problem anymore. Then ports moved to different locations to allow easier access, and all kind of different things happened. But what happened next was really amazing, right? That's the real change. What happened was supply chains changed. What happened, it became cheaper to send things unassembled from one place, from one side of the world to another, than add a piece and then send it back. The labor arbitrage, right? So the cost of labor was in US, for example, was more expensive than shipping something to be assembled in China and brought back to be sold in US. Right. So this ability to assemble pieces of physical goods, today 90% of a thing that you would hold in hand would be assembled in different, like created and assembled in different countries. So I believe something similar potentially could happen in software. So instead of a software company that is building like 40, yeah, so Ford in the original first few decades, they were building everything themselves. They were producing every piece of the car themselves. They literally had rubber trees growing next to their factory to produce their own tires, right? This is irrelevant anymore, and mostly because of the containers, because you can chop things in pieces, right? And then outsource it to China, to Vietnam, to South America somewhere, right? And then assemble it in different places and then send it over, because the cost of shipping goods is almost zero. But if you sort of follow the same metaphor, then you can try to guess how a supply chain may change, or management of software supply chain may change, how you can potentially split pieces of, split bigger chunks of software into smaller pieces and outsource each piece to another vendor. Yeah, that's a bit of science fiction right now, yeah, but maybe.
No, it kind of makes sense, right? So, like you said, it's like an arbitrage, right, that you run there. But I think we're discussing just before this podcast about the centralizing and decentralizing things.
Yes.
I think at some point this arbitrage will no longer exist. This is how it usually works, right? You have the arbitrage until the market kind of regulates, and then the arbitrage is gone. So people will go back to, like, I think it's better to have everything, the whole supply chain here in the States or Europe or whatever.
The arbitrage, labor arbitrage, will be replaced with specialization, right? So meaning that, like in let's say in agriculture, right? So certain countries produce wheat and certain others beef, right? And they don't do both. Like there is almost no country that produces everything.
Yeah.
It's economy of scale, right? So you want to.
So yeah, there's also the other topic, the other side of it, which is like food security or supply chain security, right? So in terms of Intel's chip fabs, TMSC is now building in Texas. So I mean, that's less of an issue in software because geographical boundaries aren't as critical.
Right, but then you have a trade-off, right? So on one side you can do that, right? So you can do food security or supply chain security, or what if we are at war with whatever, yeah. But then what you tend to do is to build your own thing, right? And that's effectively not efficient, right? By definition, because you didn't build it because it wasn't profitable. So now you are forcefully building something non-profitable, right? So it means that you are adding cost to production. It means that you are rolling the cost to the customer. It means that you're increasing the cost of the product, right? So which leads to inflation, which leads to, so there is no winning here, right? It's like if we can be peaceful among nations, right? We can all profit from it. And if not, then we will all pay for it.
That's true.
But I think like it's there are some parts of the software industry where those boundaries matter more. Like you mentioned the supply chain, especially the security aspect of it. I remember, for example, some discussions about 5G towers and whether some companies should be allowed in certain regions and so on. We had debates in Europe. There were some discussions in the US. I read some articles around the same thing possibly happening with like security scanners, that maybe you would want a vendor that's closer to your geography or closer to, let's say, your set of countries you trust. So do you think that will be happening? Maybe not with everything, but with some aspects of software supply chain?
This is a very complex topic, and I'm just to be clear, I'm not like I'm scared of security as like most people, even though I worked in security company. I think there is a lot of fear, right? So, and a lot of decisions are made based on fear and not reality. There is a real security, and then there is perceived security, and then there is a lot of cost, and a lot of work and cost are produced for no good reason, because people are afraid of something that is not real. Like people say that clouds are not as secure as on-prem, all kind of stuff like that. So I don't know exactly how to say. I don't know exactly what's the future of security, right? And I'm not expert enough to discuss this topic. My feeling is that all this talking about distributed supply chains cannot happen until the security and regulation are resolved, right? Because effectively what you are doing is you're embedding. It's like, imagine in a car you have a bolt that you are buying from somebody else. You need to be able to ensure the quality and responsibility of the supplier, right? So there is an entire world of regulation and standards and agreements between companies to allow this to happen, right? A car vendor would never put a bolt from somebody else, knowing that if it breaks, then they will be sued, right? So this world is totally like open. Like what you see it with self-driving cars, for example. It's not really about. I mean, there is pieces of security. So you can still hack into a self-driving car and drive it off the edge, right? But really, the bigger problem, I think, is regulation. That you cannot even drive a self-driving car in the first place, right? Because probably the regulation is a bigger problem than security at this point. I'm not sure I'm answering the question. I'm more like thinking aloud right now.
No, I think this is along the lines of what I was interested in, and I agree that probably we need regulations or clear rules on which things should be monitored and how, and which tools will be compliant with what your region expects or what your vendors expect you to provide, right?
With regions, this is a very particular problem in the cloud, right? So you know that this is constant problem. Like I'm a bank, I'm not allowed to put my loads or my data in the area that is outside of basically jurisdiction of my country. And EU made it much easier because now you can put it anywhere in EU. But still, like Switzerland, for example, is very particular about their data. But it's nothing to do with security. It's mostly to do with courts, right? So because if it's on Swiss soil or if it's on European soil, right, technically, physically sitting in the data center, right, we know as technologists that it doesn't matter in which data center it sits. But legal system doesn't understand this the same way, right? They understand it in the way where physically the data sits, then the court have responsibility for that data, right? And then you behave based on the rules of that country. I think this is a significant problem, right? So this kind of geographical localization of data. And that's why all the cloud vendors are building data centers absolutely in every country, more or less. Right? I don't think it's efficient or smart, or it's just going around the regulation problems.
Okay, so maybe going back to more technical things, we talked about cloud native and future steps. You mentioned optimizations. I'm curious on your thoughts about potential simplifications or maybe technologies that would make the orchestration easier, and your thoughts on whether it is easy today or whether it could be more difficult, more easy.
So I think sort of older I get and more experienced I get, more I think like just get everything simpler, right? And there are many ways to do it, right? So like, do you really need 300 microservices or microservices at all? Do you really need all this complex Kubernetes and stuff? Maybe you can manage with something simpler. And surprisingly, the answer is in 90% of the time, yes, right? I think sort of there are two different directions here. One, we need to continue optimizing, right? We need to invent tools or continue optimizing pieces of Kubernetes and invent new networking systems. And it's essential because without that, there will be no progress. There will be no breakthrough into new technologies. But that's not our problem right now, right? That's like scientists researching the future, right? Whatever we will be able to use in a decade. I think our main problem is that most of the companies don't know how to use what we have already, right? Most of the companies would not switch let's say the simple example, how many companies are switching off environments they don't need? And I'm not even talking about scaling down, right? Let's say scaling down is a complex problem and you need to deal with it, and maybe you don't have engineers that can handle it. But switching off testing environment is not difficult, right? And it's producing carbon emission, it produces cost, it wastes all kind of different resources. Why wouldn't you just do that? This is like leaving a room and leaving the air conditioning and lights on.
Is it probably does it have to do with the confidence of like when you bring it back, it's not going to run the same way?
So just fix it. Just fucking fix it.
I agree with that. Cool. I would like to take some other questions that we have on the chat, not particularly connected to what we're discussing, but so the question that we have is that is there any regrets that you have, and you might consider those would have been a key change in the growth of CS, container solutions?
There's some regrets I cannot share, of course.
Yep. The ones that you can.
Yeah. I mean, there are always regrets. It's very easy to say things in hindsight, right? We shouldn't have done this, and we should have, I should have spoken to that person, and there are all kind of things that are just happening. I think all my regrets related to particular people. Right? I think it doesn't really matter if we succeeded in how much money we made, or did we use that technology or another. And there are a lot of regrets with customers. Like, we should have done it better, we should have known better, we should have invested more, and not that we failed to extend the project. There was always another project, but more like we disappointed some of them, right? That they thought that it would be better. And And the regret is that, sometimes it could have been better if we would just focus and invest the time in the right place and right time. I think we tried to grow very fast and often too fast. So, close the deal, move on, and then not invest enough in do the work in the right way. But on the other hand, going that fast allowed us to achieve certain things that we wouldn't achieve if we would remain 20, 30 people company, and doing everything ourselves and making sure. So that's why everything is a trade-off.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's not an answer, but I don't think I think particularly important. There are some things with particular people that happened in the past that I regret that I or we as a company should have done differently. I won't say the names obviously, but yeah, but I value personal relationships more than the business, like people say. The business justifies everything. I don't believe this way at all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and how does this, so you mentioned in the beginning that you started off as a CTO and then you went on to the CRO and then back to the CTO. What was the sort of, what was the motivation, your personal motivations behind moving away from the CTO role and then moving back?
I think the reason I did that because there was need for that. There was a need to do something about it because we hired professional salesperson and then we had marketing team and we had all kind of things. But what we didn't have is systematic strategy and execution process. And my feeling was that I had to do it. As a founder, you have responsibility for all parts of the business. You cannot say, I'm not marketing expert, so marketing is not my problem. Everything is your problem. So in a sense, first I actually took over sales and then later on, just a bit later, marketing. And I actually loved marketing. Like in the hindsight, I did learn a lot. So what I tend to do when I get into a new field, I buy all the books I can find on the topic. There is quite a lot about marketing, so I read maybe more than couple dozen books on marketing. And what I figured is actually most people don't have any idea what marketing is. If I ask you, random.
No need.
Your best effort. What is marketing?
Marketing is sort of brand awareness and getting your name in front of companies.
That's part of it, yes.
Yeah.
That's not all of it.
No, it's deeper than that, I'm sure.
I mean, that's in a branding and advertisement and automation and PR and, there's a lot of elements of marketing. But eventually marketing is about building recognition of your brand to bring buyers, right? It's all about, eventually it's about money, right? It's about bringing leads, right? And there's many different ways to bring leads so sales can convert to actual customers. So the problem with marketing is actually very few people understand what it is and how to build it. And then there is entirely new world of marketing that is happening now, which is very similar to the cloud native sort of revolution or evolution. There is content marketing revolution in marketing, which is a very different way to market. It's and generally the idea is to become much more connected in a world that is increasingly noisier and more personal. The challenge of marketing is not to present your product in a better way, but to connect to people in earlier stages, build long-standing relationship, so they will not really buy from you, but they will sort of collaborate with you, right? And this is a real challenge, right? And there are modern ways of doing it. And actually, weirdly, we are we are the suppliers of cloud native technologies, modern cloud native technologies to enterprises. But in the marketing, we were sort of the buyers of these modern technologies, except most marketing agencies don't actually know how to do it. You can sort of look back into the technology world and you find very similar situation. Yeah, so it's very
this sounds very interesting. I'm pretty sure you really enjoyed it. Is this something that you might want to consider, like going forward?
I did and I do. So at first I think there is no way I can avoid marketing now, right? So in any new place I will be, in any new company I'll build, it's obvious that I will want to have influence on marketing in the way that things are happening. And this is one of the advantages of actually starting a new business, is the benefit of actually knowing how to do things. There's also a book that we finished writing with my colleague Jade from Container Solutions, and unfortunately the company that we were working with to publish the book went bankrupt and it's sort of in the limbo. But there is a book on marketing, so that's sort of our way to learn what is marketing, is by writing a book on the subject, which the same thing we did with cloud native, and write a book on cloud native transformation.
Cool. I wanna.
Yeah, need to figure out how to publish it now. That's another new thing to learn.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And then you moved back to the CTO role. Is that because again it was the company was in need of more direction on the technical side?
Yes, I think there was a challenge because we had a CTO, but actually we figured out what we really needed is those two different roles, CTO and sort of VP of engineering. And this is also quite common split that is happening when the company gets to a certain size. It's very difficult to, I mean, there's also different definitions of CTO and VP of engineering. But when you start as a founder, when I started this CTO, I mean, it was ridiculous to call me CTO. I was just like trying to do anything, right? And there was no, it's just a title you take just so people will sort of listen to you, right? But in early days and first few years of Container Solutions, a CTO would do anything technological, right? Managing people, working with customers, doing technical vision. But as company gets bigger, then there is more demand to split the roles. And the split was more visionary CTO and more a people manager, right? Because the team becomes quite big. And that's what we wanted to do. And then when we split the role, then Ian, who was the CTO before the split, so originally I wanted him to stay, and then we hired another person to the VP of engineering. And then I was sort of taking the role of above that, so not being CTO. But then when Ian decided to leave, then I sort of moved to replace him more as sort of visionary CTO.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And this split that you're talking about, so effectively it's having one visionary CTO who's sort of slightly detached from the day-to-day, so that they can look ahead and look around and see where, on the technical level, things need to be moving and where the company needs to be sort of moving. And then the VP was more on the sort of just managing the team and making sure everyone's happy and working effectively. Is that
Yeah, and to add to that, CTO is C-level position, meaning that being part of the executive team, so there is company strategy, there is market-facing persona rather than internally facing, right? So it's doing this kind of things, right? That makes a lot of sense, right? So yeah, so the CTO in larger companies is not a person that is operationally involved in work with customers, but a person who defines the vision of the company, connects the business to technology and back, and yeah, it's more of a business position, right? But with connection to technology.
Yeah.
It is still very much sales position, yeah, like everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so we need every sort of business unit needs a position on the executive team to help make sure that the needs are serviced and the direction is possible as well.
And I think managing people is super important topic, and it's sort of the opposite of vision and strategy. Right, so when you put a single person in this kind of position, as long as the company is small enough, it's manageable. But at some point, the team becomes big enough, and then the management of the team takes a lot of effort, and then it sort of sucks all the time and effort. Or either you neglect that side of the equation or the other side, right? So I don't think it's possible to be managing CTO and do both successfully.
So how many people did you have when you actually start realizing that this is becoming difficult to manage?
I think engineering team at that point was more than probably around 70, 80 people.
Okay. Cool. I have a question. How did you, if you can talk a little bit about the COVID period and how did the CS experience that? Maybe a little bit prior to the COVID and during and after.
Yeah. Okay. So we went into COVID when CS was about 5 years old, right? And we were growing very fast. Like we had massive amount of leads, new customers, everything was like we were in the middle of investment process. It was like really, 5 years sort of constant high, and everything was like amazing. Yeah? And then they were this talking about COVID. I was totally in denial of it for like a month or so. And, but once it became somewhat obvious that things are actually going to happen, then everything stopped, right? So effectively, there was zero new business for almost 2 years. I mean, there were here and there small pieces, but there was like from massive work and hiring like crazy. Suddenly, no one can come to the office, right? Obviously. And all the leads are totally off. So there's absolutely no conversation about new business. And every single customer we had considering canceling. Right? So it's more like end of the world scenario, right? So, and it was like, it's also not something you can do much about, right? Because you cannot go and start a bit hustling and sell a bit more, right? Because no one is buying anything, right? And you have commitment to the teams, right? And really the last thing we wanted to do is to lay people off, right? We really didn't want to do that. So it took us a while, but then we did two significant things. I mean, actually, a few things. We did we did a lot of things, right? Once we realized that the world is changing, then we used all the government programs to delay, like to make sure that we are delaying the end as much as we can. We worked with existing customers. Most of them didn't cancel, although there was slight reduction over time of the revenue. But the first year of COVID, our revenue was 80 to 90% of the year before. So we went a bit down, but it was still sort of okay-ish. We expected much worse. Then we did the internal investment round, so from ourselves and from employees and from partners and friends. We raised quite significant amount of funding, and this way almost every person in CS became a shareholder. Then we get all kind of loans in the bank just in case, all kind of things, all kind of promises. So we were prepared prepared to like long winter. But actually, we didn't need almost any of that. So we didn't lay off any people. We did furlough people to the government programs. We did cut salaries by 25% for 3 months or 4 months. But that was basically the choice was to fire people or cut salaries. And everyone except 2 people agreed to do it voluntarily. And those 2 people not with CS like immediately basically left because there was no choice for them, no possibility for them to stay. So we did all those things to basically prepare for the worst. And then for about a year and a half, it was like just keep going, just surviving, trying not to fire people as long as we can. And then slowly it started to pick up a bit of new customers. There was a new type of customers, like more those who benefited from COVID, like Muro, for example, or some others.
Which one? Sorry.
It's like Miro competitor.
Oh
Miro,
yeah.
for example, right, that comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
Some of those new companies that actually COVID did good to them in a weird way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure even during those times there are companies that need those things. And I was about to ask earlier that how do you actually manage to identify in those times, the companies that need help? Yeah, most of your customers didn't, or they were considering canceling or downscaling, but there are still companies then that would need these kind of services, right?
Yeah, the problem when there is a global recession or massive crisis in the world, right? Companies in long-term need are preferring short-term savings, right? So it happened every single crisis, right? In 2018, there is total freeze of expenses just in case, because their businesses were affected too, and they didn't know where. Because we also did total freeze. We immediately went into cost-saving mode. No travel, like cancel all the WeWork offices. They do whatever, right? Whatever it takes that goes out of the business should stop. And this behavior was worldwide, right? That's why there is nothing you can do with small exceptions. For example, companies that actually serve remote work environments, right? They were exploding, right? Anything that was related to working from home or something like that was exploding, right? So those companies needed help, but they were in different situation. They couldn't get help because they were too busy fighting whatever they already had. Right, so this first year was basically let's just get through.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about what do you see changing after the coronavirus or with coronavirus? Like you mentioned remote work.
Yeah.
I think that affected all of IT in some aspects. And what do you think about that, or what do you think about anything else that may have changed in the last few years?
I mean, obviously there is remote work. I mean, there is no company today that doesn't allow remote work to a certain extent. I think you can see from the market that some pushed to harder than others to bring people back to the office. Some gave up and just allow whatever. So, I mean, that is obviously not changing that much. And I think even companies that want to bring people back, they don't want to bring them every day back. Now there are conversations what will happen with all these office spaces and all these whole new massive buildings being built all over. But otherwise, I think there was at some point when people started feeling like it's not going anywhere and you still need to do the work. We didn't clean anything, right? We didn't, improve anything. We didn't do anything, right? Things are falling apart, right? So first we need to come back and start hiring consultants to fix things, right? Because we are obviously in it for long term. And there was massive shift to online. There was no question about that. the retail chains, the all kind of companies we were working with, a lot of their loads, a lot of their services moved online, like doubling or tripling over the course of COVID. So, which means dramatic increase in cloud migrations and all stuff like that. Yeah, so I guess we were part of this trend, but I think this is obvious. I mean, you cannot ignore it. You sort of how many times you buy things online today compared to 3 years ago.
It's true. So, do you see like the future of the service delivery consultancy as being like remote work entirely?
Like, yes and no. I think there is no substitution to personal contact. Yeah, so I think you have to meet. I mean, you don't have to meet your customers in person. You can manage without it, but it adds significantly to the quality of the interaction if you can meet them once in a while. But even before COVID, we always thought that our workforce was always remote, right? So yes, the Amsterdam office was the biggest, but we had offices all over, right? All over Europe, all over in America and Canada. And we never delivered the work from a particular office, right? We always were convincing customers to work remotely. So our engineers were local in their country, right? But they were working in different country typically. So for us, this move with COVID actually made our lives easier. So we didn't need to convince people to work remotely. But even before COVID, our best sort of setup would be that the team working with the customer would travel to the customer, let's say every 3 or 4 weeks or something like that, spend maybe a few days or a week there, and then do the rest of the work remotely. Right? I think, again, there is the remote work cannot entirely replace human interactions. Not at this point, at least. So I feel like when I meet people in person for an hour or two, it entirely changes not just that specific interaction, but also the follow-up interactions for months after that.
I agree with that. We have another question on the chat. So it goes. It says most big companies move towards the cloud, which long term becomes fairly expensive. Do you think this will change in the future, or will companies just carry the costs?
The answer is, as usual, it depends. I think the reason they're moving back is because the cost is too high, and there are many ways to optimize the cost, right? So, of course, you can move back, and then you think like, okay, I'll do the calculation. I calculate the amount of hardware I have there, and I'll do it here. But did you actually consider the cost of building local cloud, right, with all the capabilities that cloud has, and are you going to switch off the light to save the time that, are you actually going to manage it efficiently? Is it going to be secure? Are you going to, lose millions because of some ransomware or whatever, right? So is it purely because of cost? Because there are some companies, let's say we have a company that is spending 50 million euro a year on the cloud, and they made the calculation that if they move back, they will save 20 million a year. Now, I don't know, like based on what they made this calculation, I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's true. I think it could be true if their cloud team, if their infrastructure team is amazingly efficient, right? But they don't have the scale, so it cannot be that you cannot compare hardware here and there, right? Now, on the other side, what if you spend all the same effort of migrating back on optimizing the systems in the cloud? Would you get better return on investment? Would you save more? And not just in terms of money, also in terms of carbon emission, right? Are you going to use more or less energy? Which type of energy and which time of the year, right? Of the day, right? It's such a complex topic, right? So I'm not saying that the companies that made this calculation is wrong, but I don't think there's an easy answer for like a cloud or on-prem is cheaper or better. It depends, right? What if you don't shut down your testing environments, and you have 100 or 500 developers, and they all each keeps, I don't know, 10 machines environment in the air all the time, right? Just clean it up, right? You will save millions just on that. Just an example. It's just a stupid example to show how often easy it is to save money and the planet, right? And you don't need to. What often happens with this massive migrations back is that 5 years down the line and 100 millions in investment, you are still spending 50 million in the cloud and 20 million on prem, and there is no end to the migration. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point of view. It might be the case indeed.
Yeah, but you know how it is. There's planning and there's real life. And for whatever reason, the people who plan ignore real life. I don't know why they do that, but I think it's so much better to, to consider that not everything will go by the plan.
I think you do have the experience
Absolutely.
of planning and not going by the plan to be able to speak like this. But I think in general, people like to plan, and they will try to measure things and try to make it look like it's actually going according to the plan.
I'll tell you why we as Container Solutions didn't respond to RFPs, requests for proposals, almost never, very rarely. Is because it's a mechanism that is intended to create, to lie, basically lies. It's bunch of lies, right? Because the whole point of RFP is like, I need something that I don't understand, otherwise I will do it myself, right? So I don't understand, like I'm incapable of building myself. I'm putting it out there to get the cheapest offer, which is incentivizing the vendors to lie to me on the deadlines and the cost, right? Then I accept this as a fact, while we all know that this is sort of exaggeration, right? Because the incentives are against telling the truth, right? Then I close the deal, and then I'll probably leave my job after a year or two and then hand over to others. Then the cost will spiral into like 3, 4, 10 times higher, and the deadline will move double the original estimation. And at the end, so if you would expensive but higher quality vendor, you would probably save half of the money and half of the time, right? But the entire mechanism is full of wrong incentives that pushes both the buyer and the seller into this relationship where they must lie to each other to continue working with each other, right? And that's why I think this is terrible environment to work with.
And this is basically prone to breaking promises, right?
It's so absurd that when you submit your offer, you reduce to absolute minimum, the most optimistic scenario, endless. And this is all assuming that you don't even know what's going to happen. It's like you're digging a tunnel and there is like a massive thing inside and it costs you 10 million more to dig out, right? So, but you're like, no, it will be all perfect. Like this time, all the 100 previous times, there was always an obstacle, right? But this time, it will be perfect.
Yeah, right? We all know it's not gonna
okay, right?
Yeah. So what would be the alternative to an RFP? What would be like the steps in how would you approach it? So you have a company that doesn't know how to, they need something, but they don't know exactly what they need.
Every project should be incremental, right? It's like building a startup. Like it's a big thing. You don't commit to building a full startup, right? You start small. There is a mechanism of funding, for example, by VCs or by other funding companies, right? This is a mechanism that is incentivizing you to incrementally build up value. They're also pushing you to run early POCs, right? Because they only give you that little money, so you cannot actually go that far with it, right? So, and they give you very specific requirements for the next round, right? So then this way they basically always tell you this is your next goal, and this is the funding that gives you just about time to get there, maybe a bit more, right? So this way you have to increase your investment, and you have to be very lean in early days. And then as you show progress and you show that there is market fit and viable, product or whatever you're doing, then they will give you more money. So in this sense, why would you buy the entire project upfront, right? Why wouldn't you, for example, work with 3 different consultancies in the beginning, or vendors in the beginning? Define small projects, build trust with them, see how they work. And also, when they give you the proposal, they don't really know the scope of the project, right? Because it's a new environment for them. It's somewhat similar to previous projects, but they're all different, right? So the people who are giving you the proposal are salespeople who don't understand what's going to happen, right? So you understand this whole environment is like, instead of managers talking to salespeople and then agreeing on some lie, right, and then giving it back to engineers to figure out how to continue, right? Instead, I would define a project which is slow build up of value and potentially using multiple vendors.
So did you offer consultancy at several levels, not only like also maybe, I don't know, software architecture, infrastructure architecture, management, even business, marketing perhaps?
Yes.
We've been touching on that.
Because without that, it's like if it's purely technical, and this is the benefit of being bigger company with bigger brand and more connected, more known, is that you can actually talk to more senior people, right? And you can advise on more strategic level, right? So, using or not using Kubernetes is one thing, right? But, there are bigger questions. Why you are in the market, right? Who are your customers? It's like, before you build massive CRM system, do you actually need it, right? Those questions can be answered without development. Not always, often.
I was always under the assumption that one of the problems is the companies lack the technical understanding to make those decisions. So, for example, the question whether to make a CRM, if you don't have enough knowledge, you still need to hire someone, and probably that someone is going to be incentivized to suggest that you write one, using them as the consultancy or the vendor to write the CRM, right? So
Yeah,
that's also the tricky part.
Yes, but that yeah, and I understand that there are different vendors and different consultancies, and also consultancies. That's why we didn't want to be. We wanted to be vendor neutral and not resellers, because we want to be able to. We wanted to be in a position that the customer trusts us with our advice, that our interests are aligned with the customer interest, and not our need to resell some piece of software. Right, but. No, customers don't always know why they're doing things. They don't, and I'm saying it very, very strongly. I'm saying that when a technical middle manager comes to you and say, "I need to build a CRM," I'm not confident that that middle manager understands the company's strategy and understands how this building the CRM system fits into or helping to achieve the company goals. Right? I'm not always confident with that. Sometimes it happens, but more often than not, it's they're doing it because they are focused on technical problems. And often there is no connection between strategic leadership and the technical teams. And this is one of the bigger problems in our world when we were doing work in container solutions with customers. Often the question why you are doing a cloud migration would surprise them.
Okay. Is it like the case for most of the companies that, let's say, the middle, how did you call it, the technical middle manager, he would like to build something, but he doesn't really know or understand, or doesn't know that it doesn't bring too much value to the company. So if I doubt that all the companies are like this, probably most of them are, but
look, I don't want to say, like, I don't want to sound like I'm, I think that people are, they have wrong incentives, so they're stupid or anything like that. No, they're trying their best, right? They just have limited information. There is an article that my colleague Ian Mile wrote a while ago called about frozen middle, right? So there's engineering management or technical leadership that they sort of, there's a pressure from the bottom to improve technical things, and then there's pressure from above, but they don't know how to do it because they're already disconnected from the technology enough to become managers, right? But they are not connected to strategy, and they're sort of trying to do their best with the limited information and abilities they have, and they often, in modern enterprise environments, which is driven by white middle-aged male, they are not allowed to say that they don't know, right? And then it creates this environment that the executive leader think that their vision is being executed, right? And the engineers or the bottom of the pyramid, they think that the leadership have no idea what's going on, right? So there's full disconnect between the bottom and the top of the company. Now, not because people are stupid. In no way. People are the smartest people in the world, right? Except there are no communication channels. The strategy is not clearly explained to the entire company. The engineers, they're not really trying to understand the strategy. They're just focused on their technical problems and they're trying to solve them. And sometimes you talk to people and like, okay, I want to invest 10 million euro in this tool. But why they cannot answer? It's because it's better. Like, this is the worst reason to buy something. It's because it's better. Is it solving your business problem in a better way? Does it help you to save cost or increase value to customers? And if not, who cares that it's better? There is always a better thing.
yeah, they do have budgets. They need to spend the money, right? So
that's another thing. Why do they need to spend the money? I understand, so to get the budget next year, but that does sound quite stupid to me, right? That's a problem of budgeting.
That's true. That's true. But I guess I don't know. I don't know the answer. I can only assume that this is the maybe dysfunctional management segregation or segregating these layers. Maybe it's not working properly. I would assume, but it's only educated guess. Let's put it this way.
So we have a related question from the chat, which is, how do you think we can improve the expert status of our technical teams, though? In all other fields, engineers are seen as the final decision point and management stays out of technical discussions.
So one of the things that we did a lot in container solutions is communication, right? Now, the managers are not as stupid as engineers think, and the engineers are not as, as whatever they are as, managers think. Yes, there's all this weird thinking that as long as you don't talk to other person, you assume that they are bad, right? It's called negative attribution bias, right? So everything that you don't know is automatically bad. I think the main problems, it's mostly about poor communication in the company, right? So if a single engineer doesn't know what the strategy is and why their work connects to the overall company strategy, it means that the leadership and the middle management didn't explain in the strategy. top of the leadership, they don't listen to engineers and make decisions, I don't know, somewhere on a golf course with their buddies and, buy a big piece of software just because, it's IBM and they always bought from IBM without listening to the engineers. That's also poor management, right? So how can you change that? Yeah, it's, I don't know, education and communication, I guess. But it's very common, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's the case with many relationships, right? Both inside and outside of work. Communication is key.
There's this weird assumption that people will know, right? So if I'm the CEO and I write a long email on like 5 pages with the vision of the company and I send it over email and run 5 minutes presentation in all hands, from that point, everyone will understand and align for the next 3 years and work with me to do the best to fit in that vision. There is nothing further from the truth, right? It just doesn't work this way, right? People will ignore this message. Most will never read this email. You need to continue talking to them. You need to continue talking to middle management so they will talk to people. You need to build the planning and the strategy in a way that is continuously, non-stop, constantly communicating the information to all the levels of the business, right? And the same way from the bottom up is the same story. If there is no channels going from the bottom up, then the executives make decisions without considering engineers, because there is no way to consider engineering opinion, because they never talk. There is no forum where they can express themselves, right? So it's nothing to do with expertise or not being smart again.
So can you enable them to, change the dynamic between the engineers or facilitate these kind of things? Or
Yes.
Are there any strategies or maybe skills that they need to develop?
Oh yeah. That's a very good point. So what we see often, the engineers, they don't really want to understand strategic language and money language, right? So they keep saying this tool is better. It has so many gazillion mini flops of something, right? And the managers are like, yeah. So the only thing they hear is that it's faster and it costs more. And I'm like, okay, but does it fit the strategy? And the engineers are like, but it's better. So the engineers need to be educated too on understanding. This is something that when we would work with a company, we would educate the engineers and engineering managers to use the language of the executives. And which language executives talk? Exclusively money.
All right. So what would they use then? Can you give us an example? I'm curious now. What would be the language that, how would they communicate to their executive levels?
You need to convince the leadership. If you want to buy a tool that costs $1 million, and $1 million is typically a budget that is approved by the CEO, most companies, then you need to convince that this tool either saves more than it creates value in more than $1 million. That's it. How you convince that is you need to understand your business, right? So for example, this tool will reduce the number of service requests. Each service request costs you so much. Now we have half of them, and if we do half of them, that will reduce the cost of service, which is 5 million. So we will reduce it by 2.5 million, right? On the other hand, you can provide better service. For example, you can serve that much, it will increase the number of customers by 1%, which will create 5 more million revenue or something like that. Yeah, so, but the engineers don't want to go into that. It's not their business, right? But without that, it's very difficult to have a conversation with an executive, because what they do typically, they say, I have 20 million budget for IT. Now you spend it. It's always overspent. And then they come back and say, I want another million. And I'm like, okay, I will give you another million because the 20 million was random number. I will give you, but why? And they're like, because it's faster. You're like, don't give a shit.
I'm not in for faster.
Yeah.
So I know, and maybe you can confirm here that, people at C-level, they always have like trusted advisors, right? 1, 2 persons that, would help them navigating, and making decisions, especially when technical solutions arise, and they don't have the expertise to assess those things, but they do have a person, that will advise them. Is this something that you see often, or you as Container Solutions, did you have access to that kind of people, and what kind of language do you need to speak to those guys? Technical, business, both?
They're called gatekeepers. Yeah. So yeah, it depends. Of course, they're always there. The more senior person is, more gatekeepers they have, and you have to pass them through. And their role basically is to kick you out, right? And that's okay because by doing that, they basically select the most valuable supplier, so most valuable people for their managers. So that's your sales process, right? Because many companies think that they sold once the contract is signed. But in reality, you continue the work, right? And you continue the influencing the people. So you need to build the relationship with the, all kind of the user, the buyer, the approver. They're all kind of gatekeeper, right? So they're all kind of different people. So once you are in, you start building all these relationships and you start influencing them. And you use one person to influence another. For example, you use engineers and to prove your technical capabilities, so they vouch for you in front of gatekeepers. So they will say you are the best vendor in the field, right? Why? Because they met you in the meetup and you had nice beer with them, and and really nice Kubernetes conversation and whatever. Yeah. So, and you effectively need to convince them you are better than others. They are not doing it because they're bad people. It's their job, right? Their job is to reduce amount of noise to their managers, right? So you need to prove that you're valuable. That's it. Once you are, they will not just introduce you. They will work hard to convince the manager to meet with you and work with you. If so those gatekeepers, they're both your sort of worst enemy and best friend. And if you can make them your best friend, your champion, they're the best people because they're most connected in the organization. They have the time and the energy, and they're like they will make things happen, and they have access to the leadership.
Thank you so much. I didn't know that the gatekeepers.
Yeah, I think this is similar in the sort of funding VC space as well. Is you have this experience with the pre-screens, and then they flip over to pushing up the chain for you, which is an interesting experience.
But the problem is that often the company would say, they are not the bosses, so I don't care about them. But you do need to convince them. You need to sell to them first. And you often feel like you're above them because they're just simple cogs in a machine, right? But they are gatekeepers. Their job is to kick you out, and they will use their power to do that if you're not respectful or not working hard to convince them.
Do you see those guys moving between the companies?
Oh,
like
yeah. These people, they would typically be called like head of, no, not like, no. Their names. Yeah, so they're not, often they are not particularly managers. They have this kind of roles, not really architects, but this sort of side roles that it's not easy to understand what it actually means. right? So what exactly are they doing? And what they're doing is to collect information and figure out things and help people. And often they have a lot of influence. And you don't realize because, they're not in a position to, you sort of ignore them. You focus on that one person that eventually you figure out that they don't care about you and they will, it's irrelevant for them. Anyway, but that's sales process, right? That's the other thing I learned from being in charge of sales is that sales is actually a profession, right? There's specific steps to do. There's specific processes, personas. There's different things. There's jargon. There's all kind of things you can do, right? And if you do it more systematically, in the way that was developed over decades and hundreds of years, then more likely you will be successful than if you are not doing. This is maybe one of the biggest realizations in container solutions. We wanted to change everything, to do everything better, right, in the beginning. And we reinvented everything, internal processes, sales, marketing, everything reinvented. But over time, we realized that actually the standard ways of doing things are not that bad. Even if they look stupid or inefficient from time to time, but there's a reason. There's sort of natural selection of everything, right? So actually, starting from a standard process is not a bad idea. And I think a better idea is to start from standard on everything and only focus on innovation in your core business. And if a recruitment process doesn't give you what you need, then you can focus and improve that. But even then, still keep it close enough to the standard.
Yeah, and this I assume also helps with bringing people in and training them up on the processes, because you get cross-company skills.
Yes, and then exactly. And then when you hire, then you don't need to teach people on some weirdness of whatever process you invented, right? They sort of come ready. You hire salespeople, if you have a reasonably standard process, they will understand it very quickly. There is some level of expectation from founders or people that sales. There is very complex relationship between engineering and sales typically, right? So the engineers typically think that sales sell wrong things just because they're terrible and they only care about money. But really, salespeople, they want to solve people problems. And if engineers don't teach them how, then they do it in whatever way they think is appropriate, right? And so often a wrong project or project defined in the wrong way by sales, often engineering project problem. Yeah. Not always, but sometimes.
And this is where the role of a sales engineer comes in as well, to sort of blend the two departments.
Absolutely. But this is where there's a lot of connecting points, but often the connection is dropping. Like, for example, the sales engineer, it becomes purely sales and not connected to engineering anymore. And then the engineers are like, then it doesn't solve anything. So those people, they're bridges, right? And they need to perform as bridges. They need to constantly work with both sides. And if the connection drops, then it doesn't matter that they have engineering expertise. Because the engineers, they will create a new way of delivering work, right? And this sales engineer will be behind 6 months, right? And you know where it leads, right? The wrong project and
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a constant battle to keep this communication up between departments, and I mean, I assume it's all mostly process driven. Of you need to define the processes and keep the processes in place, and especially in a consultancy where, as you say, billing hours, like non-billable hours, is cost, is making sure that those processes don't get dropped in place of working with clients.
yeah.
So, Pini, I'm sure you had a good chance to interact with a lot of consultants, like the DevOps engineers, cloud native consultants, such as us. And I'm when you see so many people, you really start defining some patterns. So the question that I have for you, what do you have, like, any advice on how to increase value for these kind of like profiles on the market and be more valuable to customers and basically deliver better and more.
There is this really good book that I used internally in CS, and there was a point in time where I was giving it to anyone who wanted to get it. It's a quite short book, and it's a part of series. It's called Humble Consulting. I think for me personally, this is the way to consult, is to build personal relationships and understand the problems of the customer and then try to resolve those problems together. I think what I would advise for any, let's say with emphasis on a consultant, right? A person who is working not on a product but in a consultancy, I would say there is a lot of value in constant learning, right? Even though that some work doesn't require new skills, but there will be new projects all the time. But if you don't build the new skills, then there will be no projects over time. So you will not get interesting work unless you push yourself outside of work to learn new things. And there are many ways to learn new things. And then once you are at the customer or you talk to people, then being humble and listening, right? And actually not pushing agenda, but actually listening and trying to solve real problems will take you much farther than being the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. Very, I think it's very true and very valuable. And I recognize this in my experience as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much. We don't have a lot of time left. I think time flew by. It's yeah, nearly two hours. Do you want to tell us more about, I don't know, what are your plans after CS, and I would very much like to meet again in the future and see how things go for you. But if you have any plans or any idea that you want to share with us, just
there are plans and ideas and even things in progress. Still a bit too public to share them, right? Too public over forum, but yeah. So there is something I and few friends working on, and maybe in the next 2 or 3 months we will make it a bit more public, and then I guess you will see what it is. And but definitely it was great to take time off, and I do recommend people to take time off and sort of put the things behind. And those 8.5 years in container solutions were quite challenging and long, right? And ups and downs and a lot of energy spent. So I think taking a significant amount of time off to sort of put it behind is important. And that's another advice for people who are especially freelancers who are not always building up, for this kind of like, are not capable of taking 6 months off because money and stuff, right? I think everyone should have this kind of buffer in their lives to be able to, at any given moment, to put everything on hold and, and forget about everything and then start again. So that was great to actually be in this position that I can actually take time off and do nothing and think about stuff and past and future. And yeah, definitely it wasn't my last job, so I'm definitely going to do more things.
Happy to hear that. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's coming. So thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. It was really good to meet you again after a long time. And I wish you best luck with the new initiatives, and hope to connect again soon. Whether it's going to be online, I would prefer offline. We'll see.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely see you around.
Yeah, thanks, Pini. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.